Hello, in today's video we're going to be looking at the Excel VLOOKUP function. We'll start off by looking at the formula itself and then we'll jump into Excel to go through an example. Okay, so the formula is broken into four sections. So the first is lookup value. So this is the value to look for in the first column of our table. So the purpose of the VLOOKUP is to search for one value to return another. And some of these might not make sense at first, the descriptions, but hopefully they'll come together as we work through our example in a bit. So the second is table array. So this is the table from where you will retrieve a value. And most simply how this looks is the value we want to search for will be in the first column of our table, and then the column that contains the value we want to retrieve must be within that table array as well. So it could be the last column or it could be the second column within that table, but your table array must obviously contain both of those columns, so the value you want to search for and the value you want to return. The third is col index number or column index number. So this is the column from our table, and table being table array. So this is the column in our table array from which we want to retrieve a value. So this is entered as a numeral, so a number. And then the fourth and final part, range lookup. So this is where we feed some additional information into the formula to tell it how we want to search for our search value. So we've got two options. The first is true, and what is the default value for the formula if you don't enter anything. And what true does is it does an approximate match on our value. So we'll just try and find something that roughly matches to the value we're looking for. And the second option is false, and this is the one we'll most likely use more often, and the one we advise to use, especially when getting started with the VLOOKUP, because it ensures an exact match is used to find our search value. Okay, and then there's the formula in its entirety at the end there. So we've got equals VLOOKUP, lookup value, our comma to get onto the next section, or the second section for table array, another column to, another comma to get onto our third section of the formula, what is col index number, followed by a final comma to take us into that last section for range lookup. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll jump into Excel now and work through an example. Okay, so we're now in Excel and we're going to look at an example that requires us to use the VLOOKUP formula. But first we'll just refresh ourselves on the four different parts that makes up the formula and how that relates to this example that we have in front of us. So we've got the four different parts in column E, and we've got a description or the purpose in column F. And then what we'll do is we'll quickly populate in column G the bits that are going to apply to us in our formula. And it's worth just probably pointing out, so what we have again over the left hand side is we've got a list of fruits, so apples, bananas, lemons and oranges, and then for each one we've got the amount in column B, so 40, so we've got 40 apples, 12 bananas, 50 lemons and 35 oranges. So it's quite easy for us in a small table to see what one collates with the other, but what we're going to do is in this cell that we've highlighted in yellow, this is where we're going to put our VLOOKUP formula so that we can return the amount of apples straight into that cell without having to look it up. This will obviously be tremendously helpful if we had a lot more information to try and get through, but this is just a small example that will help us to show where the VLOOKUP is a great use. Okay, so the various parts of our VLOOKUP formula. So looking at the first part, we have the lookup value. So this is the value that we want to look for. So this is quite simple. So this part, for our example, is the letter or word apples, what we've got there in row 7. So that is going to be, our reference is cell A7. Oh, on the inside there, A7. Okay. So table array. So this is the table from which we want to receive our value. So in our example, our table, what is from cell A1 through to cell B5, is quite a small one and only consists of 2 columns. So let me just put in there where we want to look. So we want to look in from, our table is in A1 through to B5. 5. So just to look at that, so this is the extent of our table, all this here, what I'm now highlighting on the screen. Important thing to remember when doing the table array, if you to have a lot more columns than we have here, is the starting point of your table must be the first column in the table that contains the value that you're searching for. So for us, we're obviously looking for apples, so we need to start our lookup array or table array from the column that contains the value apples or has fruit in it, and the last column in our table must be the one, well, not the last one, but our table must obviously contain in it the column that contains the value that we're going to want to return. So we'll come back to it in a minute because that can get a bit confusing, but it's just worth bearing in mind and mentioning at this point. So in recap, we can see our value to look up is in cell A7, and we want to look for that value in our table that is in the range cell A1 to B5. Cool, so column index number. So this is the column within our table that contains the value in which we want to receive, or retrieve, not receive, the value we want to retrieve. So again, in our example, our column, or our table, sorry, is just AB, so it's only got 2 columns within it. So therefore, our value is going to be in column 2. And again, just, and it's not pounds. Let's just change that back. Cool, so it's in column number 2, not £2. And just to do that, so again, we've got, this is our range, A to B, or A1 to B5. So it only contains 2 columns. So the first column, column number 1, contains the value we want to search for. And again, in this example, column number 2 is the one that contains the value we want to return. Okay, so the fourth and final part of our formula is the range lookup. So this is the part that tells us, or tells the formula how we want to find our value to look for. So to go through that, and I am repeating myself here a number of times, hopefully not to confuse. Okay, so this is the Okay, so for our fourth and last part of the formula, we have the range lookup. So this is used to determine how we want to find our search value in our first column. So we've got 2 options here. The first one is it can either be identified or identified as being true or with the number 1, and that is an approximate search. So in our example where we're looking for apples, it will find an approximate search result for finding apples in your first column. And then the other alternative to that is to use false, or the value of 0, what will do an exact match. So without going into too much on this last section to confuse, it's always best just to stick with the false or 0 value in here, just to ensure that you are finding an exact match based on the value you're trying to search for. And it's a good starting point to always use this when you're getting used to the VLOOKUP formula. So we will put a 0 in there. Okay, so these are the 4 aspects of our formula that we'll be using for our VLOOKUP. So the first part, just to recap them one more time, A7 contains the value we want to search for. Range A1 to B5 is our table that contains obviously both the search term and the value that we wish to return. The value that we wish to return is in column 2, and when we're searching for our value, A7, we want to find an exact match for that value in the table. Okay, so let's go and start entering our formula. So as always, to start off with, we enter our equal symbol, and for our VLOOKUP, we can type VLOOKUP and open our brackets. And then you'll see obviously the 4 different sections in our little help box that's popped up here for the formula. So we know straight away, referencing column G on our sheet, that our lookup value is contained in cell A7, so we can select that over here. We then hit our comma to move to the next part of the formula. So the table from which we wish to retrieve a value, so we know that is in range A1 to B5, so we can now select that. You could either type it in, remembering to put the colon in the middle there. It's just sometimes just easy to click and drag the area that you require. Hit comma. So now we're at column index number. So we know this is number 2. So our value is going to be, as you see it there in column B, we wish to return. And then lastly, having hit comma, you can see here we've now got the true or false. So it gives us either the true approximate match or false exact match. So we're going to go for false, as we advise is best to do when starting out with a formula. You can either type in here false, just like that, and then obviously close your brackets and hit enter. And what we've done, I just didn't mean to do that, but we just now hit, we entered false in there and entered, and obviously the formula completed. But what I was going to mention is often what we will do, and you can do instead to make it just a bit more, well, a bit more simpler and less things to add in there, is just put the 0 value instead, what also means false. Cool. So I haven't hit enter now when I meant to do it. You can see we've now got a value of 40 here for apples. And we can see now, obviously our formula has worked. So what it's done is it's taken our search term of apples. It's then looked down column A to find out where apples is, what's here in row 2. And it's then pulled back the value, what's in the second column, what is our 40 over here. So with the calculation has worked correctly. So the calculations work correctly. And then what we can do, because obviously our search time has the cell reference in which it's in, so it's all very dynamic. So should we now want to look for lemons instead of apples, we can just type in here lemons and hit enter, and there you go, it's now brought out 50, because there are in fact 50 lemons opposed to where there was only 40 in the apples. So just to update this formula and just to make sure I understand it's correct, what we'll do is add an additional column in here, and we'll call this colour. I don't know why you'd need to know this for fruit, but it's just the first example that came to mind. So for apples, let's put some random values. Apples green, bananas yellow, lemons yellow, and oranges orange. Cool. So what we need to do is, and this is just to make sure emphasis on how the VLOOKUP works, is it helps to look at when there's more than just the 2 columns to get understanding. So because we've updated this, we now need to update our VLOOKUP. So our search value is still in cell A7, as you can see if I select it there. And you can see what it's done for us is in terms of the table array, the table in which we want to find our search and find our values. It has grown it because we now inserted that column, and you can correctly see that the extent of our table is now from columns A to C. And what we've got, so column A, the first column in the table contains the value we wish to search, and rather than a value that we wish to return now being in column 2, it's actually now into 3. So this is where we now need to update our formula, and we can quickly do that by saying, okay, it's no longer in column 2, it's actually in column 3 of the table now. And if we hit enter, you can see it's now updated. So again, just another one to test. If we now put in here bananas as an alternative, you can see it updates to give us the value of 12. Okay, so that concludes our video on looking at the Excel VLOOKUP function. If you haven't done already, please subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss any future videos, and give this video a big thumbs up. Also, as always, if you have any questions, please drop us a comment below, and you'll also find links to our Facebook in the video description. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.